If you find yourself listening to this video, what it may ignite and inspire on your journey is sacred. Let that take you on your own journey into wholeness. Be gentle with yourself and go at a pace that supports your comfort. And don't listen to this video with children around, as the material may not be appropriate for their listening ear. Many cultures, especially productivity-orientated ones that exist in the Western world, normalize chronic low-grade stress and treat joy as something that must be scheduled, earned, purchased, or chemically unlocked, rather than lived as a baseline state. If someone grows up in environments where relaxation, play, or aliveness triggered criticism, danger, or withdrawal of love, the nervous system learns that joy is safe only in special zones. Holidays, festivals, states of intoxication, secrecy, or being physically far away become permission containers. Returning home on a nervous system level feels like dropping back into a submissive, controlled state under surveillance. Long-term activation of threat physiology blunts dopamine and oxytocin systems. This can make experiences that would feel rewarding or motivating feel flat or muted. People find it much harder to feel good and often search for strong stimulus through novelty, risk, alcohol, drugs, loud environments, or intense experiences. This can bring changes in how cells receive and respond to peptide signals, neuropeptides, hormones, cytokines, etc. This can have long-term effects on health through inflammation and stunted immunity. Alcohol in particular reduces social threat detection and self-monitoring. From a polyvagal perspective, it can dampen hypervigilance, enough for the social engagement system to come online temporarily. The laughter isn't fake, it's chemically unlocked. I invite you to take a breath here and see that what is unlocked is possible as a baseline natural state of being, and this takes awareness and personal process. When we only found our way to connect and open this way, finding a different way can show us the social anxiety that emerges in our system. This can be a complex weaving of personal and collective, past and present inability to truly connect, and the resistance comes into awareness. In some societies, overt joy, spontaneity, sensuality, or relaxation are subtly policed through class norms, emotional reserve, displaying an appearance of connection, etc. Holidays become sanctioned rebellion from this state. Pleasure through commercial tourism can essentially be a form of collective disassociation with permission. This has created a huge industry that is causing great harm to the natural ecosystems of life. If people aren't taught how to self-regulate and to calm connection or play, they rely on external regulators. Substances, extreme environments of entertainment, nightclubs, constant retreats, festivals, adventure parks that evoke adrenaline. Consumer experiences, spiritual highs, romantic intensity, travel novelty. These can work to bring a form of pleasure, but it is mostly disembodied and only temporary. Repetition can look like addiction when it's really unmet regulation needs. Any practice that produces relief, expansion, or euphoria can become something the system chases if baseline safety isn't established. With awareness, we can recognize that the collective nervous system is at a baseline of feeling unsafe and unrewarded. Humans are wired to prioritize attachment over authenticity. If joy once threatened belonging, the body often suppresses joy to preserve connection, even when the original people aren't present anymore. This is a form of what is called complex PTSD. Many people report feeling like a different person when on vacation or when travelling. The system can feel permission as pressure, still trying to fit in, now by appearing to be enjoying the experience. Modern urban or industrial lifestyles often lack the regulated inputs humans evolved with, like nature, movement, sunlight, unstructured time, sensory variety, communal rhythms. Travel can restore those temporarily, and with many more commercial travel companies and tours, there is still a sense of rush, where true nervous system calm does not get a chance to stabilise. This results in people not truly connecting with the present, and this energy can be disturbing to natural and cultural systems in the place they visit. If other people historically disrupted or punished your aliveness or calm, the nervous system learns that joy and solitude can be the safest way to exist. This is not avoidance, it is a way for the nervous system to reset out of social and conditioned pressure. What would it feel like to know your true self? What if you paused from trying to fix or escape feeling, to build a place where joy doesn't have to end, and one where all feelings are accepted as part of a natural flow of life? This is a journey of awareness of how we can give our nervous system a different message. Not thinking I can feel good over there, but noticing we can learn to feel good and create an environment that supports this.
People often don't actually need more peak experiences, which can be what they can endlessly search. Perhaps it is about exploring how it would be to be in a body that can tolerate ordinary happiness, from a safe nervous system space where creativity, sensation, and connection happen as natural flow. I invite a breath here, as ordinary contentment can feel boring, unfamiliar, even threatening if the nervous system is used to intensity. Calm joy doesn't spike adrenaline, so it can feel flat or unreal at first. Perhaps with awareness, you can notice this in yourself and in society. I invite you to imagine sitting quietly, feeling your feet, hearing birds, not needing to perform, not needing to join in. That's actually a high regulation state. It just doesn't look dramatic. In this state, we notice nature more, and nature feels more comfortable around us. I invite you to imagine feeling a sense of peace inside as we connect to nature in our breath, as we hear the sounds and notice small details of life around us in the present moment. The more we drop into this space, the more we sense and feel. Because so many of us were born into attachment systems where unprocessed grief was common, on a nervous system level, we learn to find safety in dampening our personal joy to belong. I invite you to bring awareness to your own journey, where this has had the effect of drug or alcohol culture or other forms of connecting to permission to feel good. In many cases, this functions less as hedonism and more as a chance to feel safe enough to have permission to enjoy a moment of life. I also invite awareness to feel the times in your life where your nervous system felt stable and safe. Noticing when the nervous system feels safe, it stops chasing joy. It begins to learn how to stabilize in it. Not the performative, explosive kind of joy, but the inhabitable kind. This kind of joy doesn't require escape routes or permission. It's the baseline of being as we inhabit our being and connect to our senses. Human nervous systems are shaped in relationship, not in isolation. Long before we develop conscious beliefs about who we are, the body learns what is safe, what is dangerous, and most crucially, what emotional states are allowed in order to belong. If joy, spontaneity, aliveness, or self-expression were met with tension, withdrawal, ridicule, overwhelm, or punishment in early attachment environments, the nervous system does not conclude joy feels good. It concludes joy is a risk. Over time, this becomes implicit memory, not a story you remember, but a physiological rule you live inside. Because survival for a young human depends on attachment, the nervous system will suppress authentic states if those states threaten connection. This is where many people grow up feeling that being fully themselves is somehow unsafe, excessive, selfish, or destabilizing to others. I invite awareness that joy in particular can be dysregulating in families or communities organized around chronic stress, grief, scarcity, or control. In such environments, one's personal aliveness can feel to others like a threat, an exposure, or even a betrayal. The child then learns to dim, contain, or redirect that energy, not because joy is wrong, but because belonging is biologically non-negotiable, and because the brain of a young child interprets the potential of abandonment with death. Add to this years of institutional schooling where control is used as a form of efficiency. The bell for break time rings, and the child's brain learns that it has fragments of time to express, release, and play. These early conditionings do not disappear simply because circumstances change. The adult nervous system continues to seek environments that match its learned baseline of safety and belonging, even when those environments are objectively limiting or painful. Familiarity is often mistaken for safety, as the nervous system finds a comfortable connection. This means that people learn to conform rather than connect to their feelings and choice. When they try to find permission in a similar system, the system can often confirm that it is not safe. Because of these nervous system patterns, people may unconsciously gravitate back again and again to relationships, workplaces, communities, or cultural settings where their aliveness is muted, questioned, or redirected, not because they want to suffer, but because the body recognizes the pattern and feels a sense of comfort. Predictability regulates the nervous system more than happiness does, so the same system feels like a safe home. With awareness, the adult self can notice the pattern and find a way out through self-permission and awareness of how to work with the nervous system. I invite you to take a breath here. This pattern is closely related to trauma bonding. Trauma bonds form when stress and relief are interwoven, when connection is paired with unpredictability, approval alternates with rejection, or safety is conditional. These cycles strongly engage the brain's reward systems. Stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline heighten arousal, while intermittent moments of acceptance release dopamine and oxytocin. Safety and connection come from chemical familiarity. Over time, the nervous system can equate intensity with connection and calm with emptiness. Peace may feel unfamiliar or even suspicious. Neurochemically, this creates powerful conditioning. Intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards produce some of the strongest habit loops known in psychology. The brain keeps seeking the good moment within a difficult environment. Much like a gambler keeps pulling the lever on a machine even though they lose more than they win. When applied to relationships or social contexts, this can look like repeatedly returning to people who do not truly support one's well-being, hoping for the rare moments of warmth, validation, or recognition that briefly soothe the system. I invite a breath here and invite awareness that these patterns formed in relationship can be transformed in present awareness and in relation to our senses. The safest place to do this can be in nature. From a broader perspective, it can support us to have awareness that these patterns are not only personal but cultural. Many modern societies are shaped by generations of war, displacement, industrial labour, scarcity, and rigid social hierarchies. Emotional suppression, endurance, and productivity were adaptive traits under those conditions. Large populations learned to function in chronic sympathetic nervous system activation, high alert, high output, low rest, or in shutdown states when exhaustion created overwhelm. Joy, play, sensuality, and unstructured presence were often framed as indulgent, irresponsible, or dangerous distractions from survival tasks. This actually amplified and distorted pleasure and joy as something that was unacceptable and disembodied. We can see this in huge distortions of sexuality and in the hugely destructive, unsustainable darker sides of tourism. Industrialization intensified this pattern by organizing life around schedules, efficiency, and economic output rather than biological rhythms. Before industrialization, women would gather in community, create, weave, share stories and wisdom. Bodies designed for cyclical activity, daylight exposure, communal regulation, and varied movement were confined to repetitive tasks and artificial environments. That's not to mention how people were treated in these environments. Even leisure became scheduled rather than embodied. Over generations, the baseline for normal shifted towards dysregulation, while genuine ease became something to be purchased, earned, or confined to special occasions. Within this context, rebellion alone does not restore authenticity. Rejecting external rules can leave the internal nervous system operating in the same state of survival and disconnection. A person may consciously refuse societal expectations, yet remain physiologically organized around hypervigilance, collapse, and conditional or limited self-expression. The energy of rebellion itself is not coming from a calm nervous system, and the energy involved can be exhaustive. True recognition requires not only changing external circumstances, but re-establishing safety within one's own body, self-regulating, especially around states that were once disallowed, such as joy, pleasure, visibility, or rest. This process is often surprisingly tender when the body begins to experience calm, contentment, or self-directed aliveness without external permission. Old protective responses can surface. At the same time, awareness and memories of what our once exiled joy and pleasure did to be accepted or wanted come into our awareness. As we drop into safety and the very simple sensations of pleasure, anxiety, grief, numbness, or intrusive thoughts may arise. This is not because something is wrong, but because the system is encountering unfamiliar territory. It is adjusting. This can actually be a signal that we are not just doing something to appear peaceful and happy for performative reasons, but actually coming closer to our own true self. The absence of threat, which can also feel sometimes like excitement or motivation, can feel like a loss of orientation. Without the familiar tension to organize around, the nervous system must learn a new baseline. Gradual exposure is key. Just as tolerance for stress can be built over time, tolerance for well-being can also be cultivated. Small, consistent experiences of safe pleasure, warmth, nature, creativity, gentle movement, supportive solitude, and authentic connection can teach the body that positive states do not automatically lead to danger or abandonment. Over time, our capacity to tolerate embodied good feeling expands, and joy becomes less activating and more inhabitable. Equally important is developing the capacity to remain orientated to oneself rather than external emotional climates. In enmeshed or high-stress environments, attention is often trained outwards in scanning others' moods, anticipating reactions, managing dynamics. Reclaiming attention inwards to breath, sensation, posture, and personal preference rebuilds a sense of internal reference. The body learns that safety does not depend entirely on managing the external world. Solitude can play a restorative role here, especially when it is chosen rather than imposed. Without constant social feedback, the nervous system has a space to rediscover its own rhythms. Many people first encounter stable joy, not in crowds, but in quiet, sensory-rich, natural environments. Walking, creating, listening, resting. From there, the ability to carry that state into shared spaces can develop gradually. If we don't take this slowly without awareness, codependency still takes us away from our personal joy. Ultimately, stabilizing in one's authentic aliveness is less about becoming a different person and more about removing the conditions that required suppression or fragmentation in the first place. It's a return rather than an achievement. The nervous system doesn't need to be forced into happiness. It benefits from evidence that happiness is survivable. Seeing with gentle self-compassion that repeatedly returning to environments that limit joy is not a personal failing, but a deeply ingrained, often unconscious regulatory strategy. There comes a point where we learn to make more conscious choices. This is learning to remain present with one's own vitality without abandoning oneself to regain belonging. It is a profound rewiring of attachment patterns at the biological level. Self-trust builds through the nervous system, realizing that we are safe when we choose what supports our joy. The movement is subtle but radical, from seeking safety through conformity or intensity towards discovering safety in being, not the performative self, not the rebellious self, but the living self that exists prior to social roles. Reconnecting to that level of experience can feel vulnerable because it exposes both longing and awareness of what was lost. Yet it is also where resilience, creativity, and genuine connection originate. This is a quiet space we can reach within. That is a threshold and a place for regeneration. Over time, as the body learns that aliveness does not have to be defended or justified, joy stops feeling like a peak experience that must be escaped to or protected. It becomes a background condition, quiet, steady, and self-sustaining. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of enough internal safety to meet life without abandoning oneself. We meet this through subtle experiences of sensual pleasure and learning that it is safe. Individuation from generational grief is not primarily a cognitive process, but a biological and relational one. Grief that is not metabolized within a family system does not simply disappear, it becomes atmosphere. It lives in tone of voice, facial tension, expectations, unspoken rules, and the emotional range that is permitted or forbidden. Children grow inside this field before they have language to interpret it. If sorrow, loss, fear, or bitterness dominate the environment, the nervous system organizes around those states as the baseline of reality. In such systems, grief can become an identity rather than a passing experience. Loyalty to family may unconsciously mean loyalty to their emotional world. Joy, autonomy, or expansion can then feel like betrayal, not because anyone states this directly, but because the body senses a rupture in belonging when it moves outside the shared emotional field. The individual may feel guilt, anxiety, or a pullback towards heaviness whenever they begin to differentiate. This is not weakness, it is attachment circuitry attempting to maintain connection to the tribe that ensured survival. With gentleness, we can begin to notice where our aliveness was not allowed and titrate a little more of that into our life. Generational grief often originates in events too overwhelming to process at the time. War, displacement, violence, sexual distortion, poverty, illness, social upheaval, chronic emotional deprivation and trauma from births and deaths within this field of disconnection. When survival requires endurance rather than expression, grief is frozen in the nervous system. Subsequent generations inherit not the original event, but their adaptations to it: hypervigilance, emotional constriction, pessimism, control, avoidance of pleasure, or a constant expectation of loss. These patterns can persist even when external conditions improve, because the body has learned that vigilance equals safety. The next generation is often not even conscious of these states and can see their children's joy as the cause of their pain. With gentle awareness, this is the cause of most abuse. Individuation begins when one person starts to experience states that diverge from this inherited baseline. Curiosity instead of fear, creativity instead of stagnation, presence instead of rumination, joy instead of heaviness. Paradoxically, this can initially intensify contact with the grief rather than eliminate it. As the nervous system opens, previously suppressed material may surface, not only personal sorrow, but echoes of collective pain carried through family lines. Many people interpret this as regression, when in fact it can be a sign that the system finally had enough safety to feel what was previously unfelt. A crucial distinction emerges here. Feeling grief is not the same as being organized by grief. In inherited patterns, grief dictates perception, identity, and expectation. In individuation, grief becomes one experience amongst many. Something that can move through rather than define the person. The individual is no longer required to maintain the emotional equilibrium of the entire system. This shift, as it happens in one person, often the scapegoat of the family system, can be destabilizing for both the individual and the family network. Systems tend to resist change because they are organized for predictability. When one member stops participating in established roles, caretaker, peacemaker, absorber of tension, bearer of sorrow, others may unconsciously attempt to restore the old balance through criticism, guilt, withdrawal, or increased demands. From a systems perspective, this is not malicious but regulatory. The group is trying to return to the familiar equilibrium. Unconscious energies do not like to be exposed, so they amplify their adaptations in an attempt to maintain the system. On a somatic level, individuation involves developing the capacity to remain internally anchored while encountering these pressures. The body learns that connection does not have to require self-abandonment. This often includes tolerating feelings that previously triggered automatic compliance, discomfort, disapproval, fear of abandonment, loneliness, or the fear of being misunderstood or misinterpreted. This is about tolerating the feelings rather than the situation. Over time, these sensations lose their catastrophic meaning and become survivable states. Importantly, individuating from generational grief does not mean rejecting one's ancestors or denying their suffering. It means allowing their story to end with them rather than continuing it unconsciously. In many ways, it is an act of completion rather than rebellion. By living a wide emotional range connecting to life itself, the individual metabolizes what could not be metabolized before, transforming inherited survival energy into vitality. This is done through loving the self enough to give permission to actually fully grieve for themselves. It supports in this time to make ritual, asking for the support of loving ancestors to support with the grief. Ritual is making marks as a form of prayer in the physical that represent a shift. This may involve visiting the past once we have something that stabilizes us in the present, and listening to where our own life force became stuck and feeling our way through. Neuroscience suggests that new patterns become stable through repetition of lived experience. Each time a person experiences safety, pleasure, or authentic expression without subsequent punishment or collapse, the brain updates its predictions about what is possible. Over months and years, this rewires baseline expectations. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary. What once felt forbidden becomes neutral. I invite you to take a breath here. Unintegrated generational trauma remains trapped in the family line until someone is ready to go through this. That is, the past remains physiologically present, as if danger or loss is still imminent. It often manifests so that we can see it, to find awareness, process the grief, and let the life force flow again. Individuation, which involves the integration of generational and individual trauma, restores a sense of present time orientation. The individual begins to experience that they are living now, not then. This does not erase history, but places it where it belongs, in the past rather than within. Culturally, this process is increasingly visible as societies move away from purely survival-based structures towards ones that allow more personal choice. Yet the internal work remains deeply personal. External freedom does not automatically dissolve internal constraints shaped by generations of endurance. Many people discover that even when opportunities for joy or authenticity exist, their bodies hesitate. This hesitation is the echo of ancestral environments where such states carried risk. Reclaiming joy in this context is not superficial positivity. It is profound reorientation of the nervous system towards life rather than survival alone. Joy emerges through enough safety to explore, create, bond, and imagine. It expands perception beyond threat detection. From an evolutionary perspective, it supports growth, learning, and social connection functions that are suppressed when survival dominates. Individuation, therefore, involves reclaiming the right to a full spectrum of experience. Grief will still arise, but it is no longer the organizing principle. The person becomes capable of experiencing grief and pleasure simultaneously, without collapsing into or identifying with either. This cyclical nature returns us to embodied connection with our senses, and so Mother Earth, life, and Eros, which is the creative life force energy of nature. Another important aspect is the development of internal authority. In systems shaped by unresolved grief, meaning is often inherited rather than discovered. Narratives about the world that it is dangerous, disappointing, unjust, or empty were transmitted as unquestioned truths. Individuation allows the individual to derive meaning from direct experience instead. Reality becomes something encountered, not predetermined. This process frequently unfolds in cycles rather than a single breakthrough. Periods of expansion may alternate with periods of contraction as the system integrates new capacities. During contraction phases, old emotional tones may resurface, sometimes with surprising intensity. What changes over time is not the absence of these states, but the awareness that each time we go within, we will find more connection to life itself. This is alchemical gold. It is the elixir of life. And if you have got this far in your own journey, or even listening to this in depth, you have the true power to connect with who you truly are, life. Ultimately, individuating from generational grief is less about separating from one's origins and more about widening the channel through which life can move. The individual becomes a portal where inherited pain can transform into a reclamation of gifts of ancestral lineage, alongside an alignment with soul self and life purpose. In this sense, individuation is both deeply personal and quietly collective. Each person who stabilizes in a broader emotional range alters what is possible for those around them and for future generations. The inherited pattern shifts from "this is how we survive" to "this is how we live and what we choose to create for the future." What emerges is not a rejection of the past, but a rebalancing of it. Grief is allowed without being trapped or an unresolvable destiny. History is remembered, so it is no longer unconsciously reenacted. And the individual stands not as the carrier of unfinished sorrow, but as evidence that the story can evolve beyond it. When we actually allow it in ourselves, pleasure stops being something dramatic, performative, or forbidden, and becomes something quiet, regulating, and deeply intelligent. It can feel like warmth spreading through the chest, softness in the belly, a natural lengthening of the breath, a sense that the body is no longer bracing against life. This kind of pleasure is not about stimulation or escape. It is about permission for the nervous system to shift out of vigilance and into receptivity, for the body to register that it is not required to contract in order to belong or survive. In this state, life force does not surge chaotically, it flows steadily, like circulation returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. Creativity, sensuality, curiosity, and presence arise from the same source, not as something we manufacture, but as something that was waiting underneath the holding all this time. Holding all this time. What often surfaces alongside this is tenderness, grief for how long that aliveness was restricted, but the grief becomes softer, with compassion for the parts that learn to dim aliveness, and a growing trust that nothing essential was lost, only protected. Over time, the system learns that pleasure does not lead to punishment, abandonment, or overwhelm. Pleasure then becomes orientating rather than destabilizing, a quiet signal of alignment with oneself, with the body and with life, as it is actually happening now. As authentic connection returns, we notice that in grief-shaped environments, connection was often muted, reshaped, or offered outwards in order to belong. When it is finally allowed inwards again, we may feel the tender sorrow, of where we abandoned our own signals, our own rhythm, our own joy. But this grief is not overwhelming or catastrophic. It is intimate, specific and kind, like meeting a younger self without judgment. In that gentle recognition, energy that was bound in adaptation begins to uncoil, not as dramatic release, but as quiet restoration, and individuation continues to unfold, not through separation from life, but through a deeper inhabiting of one's own sensations, desires, and capacity to feel good in ways that are simple, embodied, and true. When we allow ourselves to enter quiet, receptive states through embodied meditation, trance that involves movement, contemplative ritual, time in nature, or simple embodied presence, the nervous system begins to reveal its patterns organically. In these altered yet natural states of awareness, defensive strategies soften, symbolic material may arise, and the body can renegotiate safety without pressure. This is where we orientate to the gentle truth that we always knew somewhere inside, that joy is the compass to our soul. The hummingbird is a beautiful symbol of joy. It flies through the darkness, sometimes long distances, trusting that it will find sweetness on the other side. Water is vision. We embody that vision and bring it to earth with love. We breathe into this the life that we are, and this creates the fire of our authentic desire. When we are held in nervous system safety, connected to Mother Earth, we have a chance to integrate more of our soul potential at this time of great change. If you would like to explore deeper into your own being and have resources to support your own nervous system, to connect with who you truly are, I offer mentorship for women. I invite you to click on the link to enter www.birthingthenewearth.com, where you can find out more.